Welcome to Autism Knows No Borders, a podcast where people connected to autism inspire change and build community. Together with the Global Autism Project, I'm your host, Rachel Harmon, a professional with over a decade of experience in the field of autism services, outreach, and advocacy. Are you looking for tools to help your neurodivergent teen feel supported in this important phase in life? Whether that's your case or you're curious about behavioral parenting strategies, you'll want to listen to this episode with Jheri South. Jheri South is a behavioral coach and the mother of 7 neurodivergent children, 5 being on the autism spectrum. Diagnosed with ADHD at age 40, Jheri specializes in coaching teens and parents to navigate ADHD, autism, parenting, and anxiety with mindset, strategy, and community. This episode is part 2 of our conversation, and we discuss common struggles for parents of neurodivergent teens, the importance of being consistent as parents, how to help autistic teens build confidence and self-esteem, how Jheri successfully helped an autistic teen to stop cutting herself, and tips to set realistic expectations for autistic adolescents. In this episode, discover what's possible when self-esteem saves lives. And now, I present you Jheri South. In your work, what are some common struggles that some parents might face with their teens?
Do you mean specifically if their child is on the spectrum or just in general with their teenagers?
I think you can share in general, but specifically about autism.
Well, the reason it is confusing, I think, is because we know that teenagers are going to, when they become teenagers, are most likely going to be a little more difficult, hormonal. And so it's very easy to misunderstand some of these autistic traits that come out as teenagers when one starts going through those, preteen, teen years, because there are hormones and they are starting to talk back or have emotional breakdowns that maybe they weren't having before. This is what happened with my children. My children were so easy when they were young. I mean, to the point that they weren't even emptying out cupboards or writing on walls. They were just easy. And I remember someone saying to me, "You have 6 kids?" And I'm serious. I thought, what, like it's hard? I just loved being a mom and my kids were so easy. And I still love being a mom, by the way, but then they became preteens and teenagers. And oh my goodness, I was just overwhelmed. My children are very close together and there was a lot going on. It definitely is tempting to believe they're teenagers and this is why they're acting this way and to just chalk it up to regular teenage behavior. But if you've suspected at all that there is any neurodivergent symptom there, I would strongly urge someone to get a diagnosis because let's take autism, for example. And what I think about symptoms for a teenager or behaviors from a teenager, what I think about is really just that everything is magnified because of, the situation with their hormonal state. It is that, where there might be some of this, whatever it is going on beforehand, it's just really magnified when they get to that age of like 13, 14, 15 years old. And with autism specifically, I see a lot of talking back. It comes across, I think I said earlier, as the need to be right, but really it's just wanting correct information. I had this teenage boy, oh gosh, I love him. And I asked him, "What is your biggest pet peeve?" Because he was so easy to have a conversation with, but his mother was describing him as argumentative and defiant and has to argue with every single thing she says and rude, disrespectful. He doesn't follow any instruction without putting up a fight. And so, of course, I know that when I see them, they're going to probably give me different behaviors. So I'm really trying to dig in and see what's going on with him. He did not really have any grievances. He was a pretty healthy teenager as far as his self-confidence. He had friends, the way he saw himself, the way he felt about his parents. But do you know what his one pet peeve was? He said, "My mother's spreading misinformation." I thought it was so funny. And he gave a couple of examples and they were really minor things like not knowing offhand how much Tylenol a child should have. This really bothered him.
Okay. So not even misinformation about himself. It's just...
No, it was in general.
Oh.
He's hearing things from across the room and he's shouting out the answer.
Uh-huh.
And it's driving his mother crazy because I don't know for sure. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I think he was coming across as a know-it-all, just always had to say and know everything.
Right.
But really, he was very smart. He was highly intelligent. And it's giving him a twitch that his mother is saying things. She's
Yeah.
using words that he doesn't think she should be using, and she doesn't know. He's thinking things like, she's been a mom for this long and she still doesn't know how much Tylenol she's supposed to give my sister. And so he comes across as critical and judgmental and rude, right? And
Uh,
he's not trying to be those things. He actually is very smart and he's trying to figure out, why doesn't my mom know these things? She's been a mom for so long. She should know these things. She's given Tylenol for, and then he's thinking, did she give me the wrong amount of Tylenol? So he's overthinking these situations. But it's so funny. But from her perspective, and I understand this, she was really struggling with him. She's like,
mm,
we can't go on a trip to the lake without him arguing about where the equipment goes and how it should be put away. And someone with autism will argue over those things, like packing up the car. You did it wrong. It should go over here. It would work better if you did this. And for them, it's different for everyone, but usually they believe they're being helpful or they're giving you good information to make your life easier, or they're just bothered that you are doing it wrong. And it's hard for their brain to just be calm when this is happening. But from a parent's perspective, I mean, 9 times out of 10, when a parent will bring me their child that they say is being defiant and they believe they have ADHD, this child actually has autism, is not trying to be defiant, and just is a very black and white thinker. So that's probably the most common. And also the laziness. I don't actually believe it's laziness, but it looks like laziness. And so a parent will be very frustrated because there will be quite a large handful of children who don't care enough about their grades or aren't motivated to get out of their house and try a hobby, don't do their chores no matter what systems they put into place. And so that can be very frustrating as a parent that you can't get this child to be motivated enough to get out and do things that as a parent you believe that they should be doing. They should be more active or they should be more engaged in school or even in social situations. They should care more about their future, which is funny because most teenagers don't. When they do, it's like, this is amazing that this teenager is actually thinking ahead to the future. But these are the common things that we see with autism, which I acknowledge can be quite frustrating as a parent if you can't figure out how to motivate your child to do the things that you want them to be doing, that you believe they should be doing for their own well-being.
mhm. Got it. And what do you do in those situations? How do you help the parents?
So putting processes in place, and this is important to highlight because I don't like the word discipline. I'm not big into discipline. I do like rules and consequences, boundaries and consequences, and I also like rewards. But I have found this to be true that someone with ADHD will usually, again, this is usually, as soon as I give advice like this, there's always someone that says, not my child. So this is usually, and by the way, when you have someone who has ADHD and autism, it can change the advice that I give and the tools that we have because someone who has both, some of the behaviors that they have will lean more towards ADHD and other times that will lean more towards autism. So every child is very unique. But overall, if we're just looking at ADHD, I will find that rewards, if it's a reward that hits on one of those 5 things I mentioned earlier, novelty, interest, a challenge, or something that they're passionate about. So, in other words, they have to pick the reward. If I say, oh, well, go get ice cream if you finish your math homework, a reward is not going to get them to be able to finish their math homework in that situation. They'll just think, great, I'm never going to finish my math homework. And now I'm not going to get ice cream. So if there is a reward involved, it's because we sat down and we talked to the child about something they will work for. They want this thing so badly, whether it's money or a new pair of shoes or it's to go on an outing for the weekend. Those rewards will work better than consequences. Both, anyone who's neurodivergent tends to usually be a little bit more stubborn and will dig in their heels. But especially with ADHD, I've found there's a give up mentality because there's no dopamine there. ADHDers are dopamine chasers. They will respond better to rewards of their choosing. Now, with autism, I still absolutely believe in rewards. But because many times we're dealing with alexithymia and we're not super in touch with our emotions, I will find that there is a much greater chance for a shoulder shrug and I don't care. Just take away my phone, just take it all away. I don't care. I don't care. I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to go get ice cream. I don't care if I get those shoes. So we have to focus a little bit heavier on consequences. I've interviewed a lot of really successful adults who have autism. One man in particular in the UK, he does global education. And it seems to be true universally to the adults that I've talked to that say that they, as a child, they didn't want to do anything. They didn't focus in school. They didn't do their chores. They didn't do their homework. They didn't care. And I'll ask them, well, what made you so successful as adults? And they said, when I had to get out on my own and just do it, and there was no one there to do it for me. And the only reason I did anything as a child was because I didn't want my favorite privileges to be taken away. That is the only reason I did it. And so there is a difference in the way that we set up processes at home, depending on whether or not they're on the spectrum or they're more ADHD. We implement both, but it's consistency too. And I will be the first to admit, as a parent, it's hard to be consistent. It is so hard to be consistent because we are living our life of stress and work deadlines. And I have, 7 children. So to be consistent with one child who needs a lot more attention at any given time can be challenging. We're human, but consistency really matters because if we're not consistent, if some days we implement the rules and then other days we don't, we are teaching that child that if they push back hard enough or they catch us when we're already exhausted, that they can get away with whatever it is that they don't want to do. And what I have found is that it robs the child of the opportunity to take responsibility for themselves. Because instead of focusing on, oh, it's true, I shouldn't have done that, or I should have done that, they think to themselves, you're the problem. Last time I didn't get in trouble, and then today I'm going to get in trouble. Okay. You just feel like being mean. You're just punishing me because you're having a bad day because you didn't care last week. So it's really important that we are consistent with our kids so that we show them, I love you. I'm not going to give you long lectures. I'm just going to lay out the rules and the boundaries, and you either meet the expectations or you don't. And then here's the consequence if you don't meet, and here's the reward when you do. And so if we can be consistent in that way, we see a lot of progress for these kids who, by the way, with executive function deficits are usually at least 3 years behind just when it comes to executive functioning. So if we're looking at someone who's 13, they're really at an executive function level of 10. And, we have to really evaluate, is what I'm asking them to do age appropriate? Parents will have the thought often, such as they'll think, I shouldn't have to be reminding them at this age, or I shouldn't have to be this involved with their homework. And I don't like statements like that. I believe that every child is different. And I really do think because of executive functioning deficits and the way that their brain is processing information, we really do help them and benefit. It's a benefit to us as well if we can constantly be evaluating what would be useful to them and where can I fill in the gaps as they're learning. That's what they're doing. They're learning. They haven't mastered yet. So every child is different. Some of my children, I'm still very involved at an older age in different parts of their life, and others I'm not, because every child is unique. If we can get rid of that should statement, what you should be doing and shouldn't be doing for them at this age, and just figure out where they could really use help, I think they will be more successful and we will be more successful and feel better about our parenting as well.
I love that. Yeah. I have an 8-month-old, and it's giving me some ideas already of
Oh, good.
how I can show up for her as a mother. Hey, Rachel here. I'd like to thank one of our listeners, Izzy0826, for reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts. They said, "Thank you for having conversations that will help people grow and think beyond stigmas and misinformation. Thank you for the kind words. 5-star reviews like yours help us to continue spreading autism awareness and acceptance around the world. If, like Izzy, you're finding value in Autism Knows No Borders, please leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts." And now, back to the conversation. And so I wanted to ask, you mentioned earlier that one of the inner struggles that you hear from teens is that they're maybe not good enough, or they're not liked by other people. How do you work with them to boost their confidence and their self-esteem?
That's a great question. And one of the things that I like to highlight is a podcast that I listen to where a woman who now specializes in body language and relationships, she talked about this. She said that she was socially awkward. So not everyone is going to be socially awkward, even if they feel socially awkward. But she talked about believing that everybody hated her. And I'm going to have to get you the name because it slipped my mind. She was on the Diary of a CEO podcast, and she is fantastic to listen to. And so eventually she did a study on what makes a happy teenager. And what they found was that they had the most positive interactions throughout the day. And when I'm talking to teenagers who are on the spectrum consistently across the board, they will say, "Oh, I hate this class and I hate the people in this special I'm taking and I hate my teacher and I hate the kids at lunch." And so I think there's a handful of things that could contribute to that. So some examples are the sensory overload. They might be at that place at lunch where now it's so noisy and they can't go to a place where they can calm their nervous system down unless they go in the bathroom. I think another thing is that they really do find people their age more obnoxious than maybe the average person. People on the spectrum usually do talk to adults and get along with adults a little bit better because there's not this sensitivity and panic way of thinking of when they're talking to their peers. They're so worried about fitting in, and many times they'll use language that's a little bit more mature for their age. And then I think that the main thing is that they don't believe that other people like them, that they're misreading just a resting face for "I hate you, I don't like you." They have not picked up on their social cues, and they didn't learn to do that. So I tell them about the study to just highlight how important it is that we develop this skill of learning to like other people, because many kids on the spectrum prefer to isolate. They'll agree to plans and then they'll cancel the plans. They like to withdraw and isolate. And without realizing, there is a delayed emotion there with alexithymia, where someone on the spectrum, they might have a situation that happens on Monday that would cause an average person to feel quite sad, and they don't feel sad. But then on Friday, they do feel sad. And they'll say, "I feel sad for no reason." And they're not connecting the dots that you're probably sad because of this thing that happened on Monday. And you're not aware of how your emotions work and how this delay of emotion can, fire off in your brain. So helping them understand that as well. But because they're not, super in touch with their emotions, it's a real challenge for them to get out of their room and even have a desire to go do these social interactions that they find mostly annoying. But they don't realize that because many kids on the spectrum feel depressed, this is the reason. They're not getting out. They're not having personal interactions. They're just not doing it. And it's like eating a bowl of ice cream or doing something that you really enjoy. It makes sense in the moment that they would not go out and do these things. It's not what they want to do. It doesn't feel good. But over a long period of time, it's actually creating more depression. So I teach them about all of this. And then I have a very specific coaching model that it's an emotional regulation piece of coaching, but it also helps one look at what's really happening. We get it out of the brain and onto paper so that we can see what our brain is doing, what we're making things mean. If we can get it out on paper, it makes a lot more sense. We can evaluate, what am I making everything mean? What's really happening here? Are there other truths? And I help them break down where they're getting these ideas that people hate them, or what did they actually do. And I'm teaching them to do it on their own so that eventually they don't need to come to me and they can learn to do it by themselves. But very rarely can they prove that their thoughts are true, that people hate them, that they gave them a dirty look. But without assistance in that process, they just go on believing all that they know to be true, that a resting face must mean they're looking at me this way because they hate me. And I also think their own lack of self-confidence and not really having a lot of reason that people would like them contributes and reaffirms that negative mindset.
Hmm. Can you share a success story about one of your clients?
Oh, yeah. Well, I have a lot of them actually because I've been doing this for a long time. So everything from suicidal ideation, where I had a girl that had started cutting when she was in fifth grade. and she had been cutting for a couple of years. And it was clear that she was on the spectrum, but her father absolutely did not accept that diagnosis, did not want to have her evaluated. And so her coming into coaching and talking about she was highly intelligent and some of the things that she could do were quite amazing. And she wanted her dad to understand her, and he was saying, "Hey, we're all different." And there's a lot of people out there that do feel that we don't need a label. Like, let's just work on whatever we could benefit from working on. And I understand, the positive mindset behind that, but this was very damaging for her. So in coaching her through her social situations, she was not talking to anyone at school. She was cutting. She was struggling with her parents. She started to have, when you live inside your mind and you're not really getting things out, you also come up with your own negative conclusions. And when you're a child, they're not always positive. So then she started to develop a mindset about her parents and what they thought about her. And so through coaching, not only was she able to get to a place where she stopped cutting, we were able to get her parents in here, and he was willing to accept her what was her potential diagnosis and have her evaluated. And I worked with her for quite some time. We had a lot to unravel. She started opening up, which was huge because a lot of times it's just safer in their mind to just not talk about their feelings. It's very uncomfortable. And because they're not super in touch with their emotions, they don't always know how they're feeling. It's hard for them to put it to words. She started really opening up about things that were embarrassing to her, things that she was scared of talking about at school. And they were simple things like what she did over the weekend. And we were doing a lot of role play. By the time I was done working with her, she was going to the mall with friends. She was starting conversations in her classes. She was not cutting anymore. She was seeing herself very differently. And by the way, recognizing maybe my wiring is a little bit different, but she loves all the things about herself. She loves what she's interested in. She loves her hobbies. She loves the movies she likes to watch. She loves that she watches the same movie 2 or 3 times every Friday night. She loves that about herself. And when she was able to embrace that and realize it's not wrong and it's not weird. It's just who you are. And if you love it about yourself, recognizing that her only issue was that she was worried other people didn't love it about her. She was able to really find her people. She had some great friends that really loved her, increase her self-confidence. And, she was really thriving
Hmm.
by the time that she was done with coaching. And so that was just one story. I believe that she was in 7th grade when I started working with her, but for 2 years, she had been cutting her arms and hiding it until she started junior high and a volleyball coach noticed.
Wow. Yeah. I love that you've said she found her people because I think sometimes that's what autistic people need, that sense of belonging and community of people who accept them for who they are. And instead of just trying to force themselves into places or spaces where it's not a fit for whatever reason, then they can turn to other places through social media, even and different kinds of groups that will understand what they're going through.
Right.
So I think that's really important.
I agree. We see that to be true with ADHD and with autism, and usually it's opposite ends. It's someone with ADHD tends to be a little bit more hyper, at least when they're talking and they're interrupting and they're running late and they're just constantly telling stories many times about themselves. And so that can be very off-putting in high school. But when you meet a fellow ADHDer, it's like, we understand each other. You interrupt me, I interrupt you. And this just feels like such a natural conversation. And same thing when you have someone on the spectrum, they can sit in silence for long periods of time and be so content and not need any talking and just be feeling connected to this person. Where many times, if you are not introverted or you're not on the spectrum, you might think, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you talking? What's going on? How come you're not saying anything? You just have this look on your face. Are you bored? And it's like, no, they're completely content. And so when we talk about finding your person, it's people who allow you to be who you are and you're not feeling any sense of judgment. Even if they're not trying to judge, you're just feeling completely at peace with being able to not talk a lot or talk a lot, depending on where you are
Hmm.
with neurodivergence. But it is really important because really, I think joy comes from two things. It comes from feeling good about ourselves and being able to show up in a way that we really want to. And also, it comes from our relationships and positive interactions throughout the day, which then also contributes to the way that we feel about ourselves, because it does feel good to tell ourselves, people like me. I have a friend, I have someone who gets me. But so much of that work then starts with what you believe about yourself.
Right.
And my experience is that as someone who's on the spectrum usually has very negative thoughts about who they are and what they're capable of, either because of past experiences or the high level of masking they're having to do to fit in with society.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Jheri, thank you so much. I'd like to close with one last question. What advice would you give to parents who have autistic children, maybe approaching adolescence, kind of that preteen age? How would you prepare them for what's to come?
I would say expectations are everything. And I've noticed whenever I'm really struggling with my own children, it's because my expectations are a little bit higher than where we're actually at. As I mentioned before, that should word, that I shouldn't be having to do this for them. They should be able to do this on their own. I always say we're always shoulding all over the place because everything is about what we think should be happening instead of what's actually happening. And so being willing to accept, the child that we have instead of the child that sometimes we wish we had, the child that was doing better in school or the child that was capable of keeping their room clean. And just having real expectations, first of all, about executive function deficits and that it might take a while for that child to catch up. But then also being ahead, by in your mind, by coming up with processes and experimenting with what works. Many times parents will come up with a process and maybe they'll put some work into it. They'll write things down or they'll have a chart and everything. And then it doesn't work right away. And then there's so much frustration like, oh, this doesn't work. Nothing's working. And very rarely when we say nothing's working or I've tried everything, is that true? And if we can have grace for ourselves as parents, if you are someone who loves your child and wants what's best for them and is willing to continue to try new things, then you are the perfect parent for them. You are invested in knowing that there's going to be some things that don't work, but it's not a failure unless we completely give up. And having that kind of grace for yourself as a parent is the first step so that you can have grace for your child. Many times when we are frustrated with our child or we're frustrated with where we're at, we're frustrated with ourselves because we can't figure it out or we're expecting that the work we did or the process that we put together should have worked and it didn't. And we're throwing up our hands in frustration. But if we can have more grace for ourselves and realize like, oh, okay, that didn't quite work the way I wanted it to, but I know I can come up with something else. When we can manage ourselves, we'll be such a better space for them to be able to experiment themselves. Because when I'm working with a child who is neurodivergent or an adult, we're constantly talking about creating an owner's manual for our own brain. It's like, here's what we know about autism. Here's what we know about ADHD, but this is all very general. How am I going to take this information and make it work specifically for me? And that's what I'm helping teenagers with is understand, okay, here's usually what works to get your brain engaged. Let's try some of these things and let's record what worked and what didn't and why. So just like we might have to experiment with medication, if someone were to take medication, we're doing the same thing with mind management techniques and learning how to get our brain engaged. So, really, as a parent, just taking a step back and realizing this is a process to figuring out what works best for this child and giving them room to grow and having those expectations that not everything we do is going to work. We're going to have bad days. And it doesn't mean anything. If you think about it, it's like usually when we're so stressed out or we're frustrated, it's because we're making it mean something. Like my child's behind or they're not going to get this or, it's like it doesn't mean anything. It just means
Mhm.
that we're still figuring out what's going to be the thing that really helps them thrive in the situation. And when we figure it out, it's going to be awesome.
Amazing. That's great advice. And how can people learn more about you?
Okay, well, I am on social media. So on YouTube and Facebook, I'm Jheri South. And on Instagram, it's at Ms. Jheri South, MS Jheri South. And then I also have a website where I have a free webinar and some different tools. You can also schedule a consult with me because I do offer one-on-one behavioral coaching. And it's my name, jherisouth.com.
Okay, great. We'll put links to everything in our show notes.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I'm sure that many people are going to have some little tidbits that they can take home with them, whether they're autistic themselves or they're parents of a loved one. So thank you so much for sharing your story and just getting vulnerable with us. I think it really makes a difference for people out there to just know that they're not alone.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the conversation. It's an important conversation to have, so it's been great to be here.
Thanks for tuning in to Autism Knows No Borders. If you enjoy this podcast and you'd like to support our mission, please take a moment to rate the show and leave a review. You'll be helping us to continue spreading autism awareness and acceptance around the world. Thanks for listening. Take care.